Hi there, I'm Nick. I'm the guy who did that Tic Tac Toe video. Some of you may remember seeing this on the companion user group, and I've had a lot of requests from people asking me how I made it and if I would share my configuration. Unfortunately, companion doesn't make it really easy to do that because the game relies on some custom variables and some triggers which do not export when you back up your configuration. So I thought I would just do an explainer video, seeing as it had over 400 likes, which is crazy. But just at the top of the video, I did want to just quickly draw attention and give a shout out to the work of Josef Šimíček. Awesome work here from him, who basically did a much better version of the game that I originally posted, and I've shamelessly stolen some inspiration from his video, and I've implemented some of the same things that he's done, like a score counter and some animations for the win and some other cool stuff like that. Anyway, I just wanted to give him a shout out and to acknowledge that he compelled me to actually go back and revise my version 1 of this and to make V2, which is a lot cleaner and runs a lot better. So anyway, here is the explainer video. I thought I would just as quickly as I can, and I'm probably not going to be able to manage it very fast. I'll just try and rush through how the game is built. Okay, let's jump into it. In a nutshell, the game is made with custom variables, triggers, and buttons. So let's just start by looking at the custom variables. These are pretty straightforward. You have one that records whose turn it is. That can either be 0 for nobody's turn, 1 or 2, depending on whether you're X or O. You have a choose variable, which is what you use when these two buttons are setting the player at the beginning. There's a reason that you're not directly setting custom turn, and it's to prevent you from being able to just press the button in the middle of the game and change player. We have a game state variable. This is really important. This governs where the game is in its loop. So if it's in 0, you're at the beginning and you're picking a player. 1, you're in play. 2, X wins. 3 is O wins. And 4 is a tie, or a cat's game if you're English. We have grid variables G1 through 9. And these are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These start at 0. And when you press any of these buttons, it just simply sets the variable to 1. When you release it, sets it to 0. So that's like a press variable. And then we have move variables 1 through 9. These are start up as blank, and what they do is record which move has been played in which grid. Pretty straightforward. You have score counter for X and O, and you have a winner variable, which we use to help with the logic of doing the cat's game and making sure that we don't trip ourselves up later. The buttons are all pretty straightforward. I'll run through them super quick. We got a score button here that just simply spits out the variable value of score X and score O using the clever \n for a new line. It's a great trick if you don't know it. We have the choose a side button, which is also the reset button. All it does is it puts the game state into 0, it sets the turn to 0, and it zeroes the board. So it blanks all of these variables, M1 through M9, it just sets them back to blank. And it also has some feedback which tells it what text to print. So if the game state is in 0, it knows it's at the beginning, so it says pick a side. If it's in 1, you're playing, so it says reset. If it's 2, then X wins. 3, O wins, and 4 is a cat's game. Super straightforward. These two buttons are basically the same, but they're the mirror of each other with slightly different variable values. You set the choose variable to 1 if you're X, and you set it to 2 if you're O. And when you release it, just zeros the choose variable, just so that you've reset it. You've got some feedback that tells it what color to be if the turn is set to 2, so it's O's turn, it lights up green. If it's X's turn, it blanks out. What's this one? If the game state is 2, which means that X is 1, it turns black. If 3 is 1, it turns black because you want to clear the lights for the win animation. And if it's a cat's game, they both light up blue. You'll see that in a bit. So those two buttons are pretty straightforward. And then it's just the grid buttons. The text is just what move has or hasn't been played for that square. So that would be M1, that would be M2, and so on. And then any button that you press on, when you press, it sets the grid, the press variable, effectively, the G variable for that square to 1. And when you lift off, it sets it to 0. That's all there is to it. the buttons are actually really straightforward. So that's why when people asked me to share the config, unfortunately it was just a bit more complicated than just exporting page 50. Anyway, so that's 2/3 of what makes the game work. The last part is the triggers. Now this is the real magic. I'm afraid it looks a bit intimidating, but most of these are almost clones of each other. So let's run through it super quick. At the top of the game, we have a trigger for picking X and picking O. So it says basically if the choose variable is 1, and if the game is currently at the beginning, then here's the action. You set the player's turn. So 1 is player X, and 2 is player O, and 0 is nothing. And it resets the choose variable, and it sets the game state into 1, which means that you're playing, and it blacks out. This is important. It blacks out the button of the player that isn't playing at the moment. So if I just show you what that looks like, here we are at the beginning, and if we pick X, it just blacks out the other one. And conversely, if we were to pick O, it blacks out X. It just means that when you, at the beginning of the game, you pick one, and then you know which one you've picked. It's just a nice little bit of UI feedback, all there is to it. O is the obvious of that. Whose turn? This is just the turn counter. The turn counter variable is really simple. It's 0 at the beginning of the game when no one's picked a player. And then turn is either 1 or 2. Any time a move is played, it just applies the math operator to increase the turn by 1. So if it's 2, it gets to player 2. And then if it goes more than 2, so if you're on player O's turn and you press button, it simply detects that it's trying to go up to 3, it catches it, and it chucks it back down to 1, making it X's turn. So it can either be 0, and then it just infinitely bounces between 1 and 2 until something else happens or someone wins. These are effectively the play variables. So state all the way through G1 through 9 for X, and then repeated for O. Looks very intimidating. It's actually quite simple. Let's just have a quick look. So these are, just check a few things first, right? So if the game state is 1, are we playing? Yes. Have we pressed the button for grid square 1? Yes, we have. So it's currently being pressed down. That's fine. Okay. Is there anything already played in that spot? So it just checks, is M1, the move, the record of which move has been played, is it not equal to X? And if it's not equal to 0, i.e. it's blank, then you say, okay, fine. You can, and also if it's X player's turn. So this is the part that's listening out for who's playing. And okay, if it's X player who's doing all of this, then we're going to play an X. And if it's the other one, it's an O. And then it does all of these things. And then it simply has the action of recording which move has been played to M1. And that's 1 through 9, depending on the spot. And it increments the turn counter by 1. That's all there is to it. These obviously are just modified then depending on which square, and whether it's players 1 or whether it's player 2. It'll be listening out the exact same, but it would just listen for whose turn is it. If it's player 2, then we're printing an O. That's all there is to it. Then we have a number of win variables. There are 8 ways to win in Tic Tac Toe. Obviously, 3 lines of horizontal, 3 lines of vertical, and the 2 diagonals. Each one of them, again, they're repeated 1 through 8 for both player X and for player O. And if you pick one to have a look at how it works, it's just got some logic at the beginning to check what's happening, right? So if the game state is not 0, so it's not the beginning of the game, and if it's not 4, which is a cat's game, then we start checking, right, like, okay, what moves have been played? So if for instance, this is the first horizontal line across the board, one's spot 1, 2, and 3. If they're all equal to X, then X is obviously 1. And we put the game state into 2. So then that's the if, and then we get to the what do you do. Put the game state into 2, meaning X is 1. Increment X's score counter by 1, which is fine. And we set the winner variable to 1. This is quite useful for just having some logic surrounding making sure that the cat's game doesn't get triggered incorrectly. And then it just does some flashing. So you pick the relevant banks, the relevant buttons for the spots you've just checked for that you won in. In this case, it's M1, 2, and M3. And it sets them all to red. And then after a little delay, it sets them to black. And then another bigger delay, it sets them all to red, sets them to black, sets them to red. That's all there is to it. You just alter these depending on which line and depending on which squares and which player. So we'll be listening for like, was for instance, if you pick one at random, looking at O, okay, so are the variables O, O, and O? And if they are, then great. Then you can set the game state into 3, meaning that O has won, and you increment O's score counter, and you set it all to green instead of red. So that's all there is to it. These are the win variables. We have a little the choose flasher at the beginning. This is just a little bit of UI. It's just a bit decorative. So this, I'll show you what this looks like. If you've picked a side, let's imagine that you're in the middle of playing a game. If you press reset, it will just dink, dink, dink. It will flash these, telling you, right, you obviously need to pick one of these, and then you pick one and the other one blacks out. So to make this work, you just check the game state. If we're at the beginning of the game, if game state is 0, and then all you do is the same kind of thing. You have some delays and some background button color, and you pick the relevant banks for the X and O buttons, and you just flash them on and off over a period of time. So that's fine. I have a little animation which I really enjoy for when you've won the game. Let me just show this to you. So if I pick side, and let's imagine I'm going to play, for instance, let's have a nice full board for this, because that'll be fun. Right, and if I win the game, there we go, I've won. I like having the way it vanishes all of them sequentially, wipes them off the screen. So the win wipe, all it does is it listens for, okay, is the game state not equal to 0, i.e., so we're not at the beginning of the game, we're not playing, we're not in the middle of play, and we're not in a cats game. That is to say, either X has 1 or O has 1. So we must therefore be in states 2 or 3. If any of those things has happened, you incrementally blank the values for the moves to 0, which then, because the buttons are displaying those variables, they will go blank, and you black out the background. So to show you exactly again, like quickly what that looks like, that means that if you had, for instance, a win, they're flashing green, they're all green, it turns the variables off and it turns the backgrounds back to neutral. That's pretty straightforward. So it blanks the whole board, and then at the very end, it puts the game state back into 1, and it sets the winner variable back to 0, just for a reset. Pretty straightforward. And the last thing then, really to show you it all, is the cats game. So a cats game is quite, or a tie if you're an American, it's quite a straightforward thing. It just makes sure that if all the spots on the board have been played and no one's won, that we count that and we put the game into the right state. So if the game state is in play, okay, and if M1 through to M9, so if all the moves are not equal to blank, that is to say they could either be X or O, then the winner variable, and crucially, if the winner variable is 0, so we don't trigger it incorrectly, we put the game into game state 4, which is the cats game, which then triggers those 2 buttons here and here to, if we check them, it triggers the feedback state in 4 to go to blue, both of them for a cats game. And it will also trigger the cats game wipe after a certain period of time. So this just says after a couple of seconds of a cats game, where if you get into game state 4, give it a couple of seconds and then 0 the board. And this is what that looks like. So if I just hop into the emulator, right, let's just do this. So 1, so we achieve a cats game. It goes blue, it says it's cats game, and then it just wipes it off the board and it changes you over to the other player and it starts you back at a fresh game. So really, that's all there is to it. The only interesting thing I wanted to mention is that the reason in the win trigger that it doesn't just say is the win state. If for instance we're listening for a winner here, has O1 in line 3, which is straightforward. You would think it would be enough to just say is the game in game state 1, and then have these moves been played in these relevant squares, and then if so, just move the game state into the winning state for that player. The problem with that, and this is a thing about Companion, is that I think the way it works is that it runs the logic of the triggers sequentially at the end of its list. It runs last. So it runs those triggers at the end. And what that means is that if it's running through all of this, and if it hits one of these wins, for instance, along a top row. So if you had like a top row win, but if you didn't have this set the way I've got it set up, only one of these would light up. And obviously, we want it to actually light up both and to run both triggers. And to achieve that, we just make sure that the game state logic in the win trigger is that it's not set to 0 and it's not set to 4, which is to say it's either in play or somebody has won. And it doesn't lock you out of then running another trigger. And in fact, the hilarious side effect of that is that when you're playing a game, if you play like this and you win in 2 places, yes, it will light both up. But if you actually watch the score counter for X, it will actually run, because it's run both triggers and incremented the score twice in one game, it actually increases it by 2. So I'm afraid that is a flaw in my programming, but I think it's good because you've deserved to win twice if you're that clever. That's the whole game. There's nothing else to explain, really. I think that's basically the shape of it. I hope that you've all enjoyed it and it's encouraged you to dig deeper into Companion and what it can do. If you liked this, let me know, I suppose. Enjoy. Hope you'll enjoy Tic Tac Toe. If Companion make it possible to export the full configuration, I'll share it with everybody, and then hopefully it makes it easy for you to have this at work, because that would be cool. All right, bye.